Before we go anywhere, I want to know something. Where in the world are you watching this right now? I mean that literally. Drop your city, your country, right now in the comments below. I read every single one. Every single one. It genuinely blows my mind where this channel reaches. And one more thing. What time is it where you are? Morning coffee? Late night rabbit hole? Seriously, just tell me. Something about knowing you are watching this at 2 a.m. in some city I have never been to. That does something to me. Today's like goal is just 10. That is it. 10 likes. If you are finding this video right now and it means something to you, that little like button is your way of saying so. It takes 1 second and it genuinely helps more than you know. And if you are new here and you like mysteries that are actually documented, actually real, actually unresolved, hit subscribe. We go deep on this channel. We always go deep. Alright. Now, let me take you somewhere. Germany. The final winter of the Second World War. It is February 1945. The sky over central Germany is the color of old bone. Pale, cold, completely still. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 climbs through 4,000 meters of silence. The pilot inside has flown over 300 combat missions. He has seen burning bombers fall like stars. He has watched cities disappear beneath smoke. He is not a man who frightens easily. But on this morning at this altitude, somewhere over the Ore Mountains along the German-Czech border, he sees something. Something that is not on any flight plan. Something that does not behave like any aircraft he has ever encountered. Something that, when he files his report that afternoon, his commanding officer reads twice, then locks in a drawer. The report will not surface again for more than 50 years. So what exactly did he see up there? To understand what happened on that February morning, you need to understand what the Luftwaffe was in the winter of 1945. By early 1945, the German Air Force was a shadow of the machine that had terrorized Europe 5 years earlier. Fuel was rationed down to almost nothing. Experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. Boys who had barely finished flight school were being sent up in aircraft that had not been properly serviced since the autumn. The pilot at the center of this story was different. His name was Hans Joachim Donar. He held the rank of Oberleutnant, a first lieutenant, within Jägerschwader 7, one of the Luftwaffe's elite jet fighter wings. JG-7 was one of the very few units still flying the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. These were not desperate conscripts. These were the most experienced aviators Germany still had. On the morning of February 13, 1945, Donar was conducting a solo reconnaissance sortie over the Erzgebirge, the Ore Mountains, a ridge of peaks running along what is now the German-Czech border. The mission was standard: assess Allied bomber approach corridors ahead of what would become, within 24 hours, the firebombing of Dresden. He took off from Parchim Airfield at 0640 hours. He was expected back within 90 minutes. He landed 2 hours and 11 minutes later. The logbook notation for the extra 41 minutes reads in German, simply, Unplanmäßige Beobachtung. Unplanned observation. That is all it says. But in a separate handwritten report filed that same day, Donar described what he encountered during those 41 minutes in language that his superiors found deeply uncomfortable. It was not the enemy that unsettled them most that winter. Hans Donar grew up in Dresden. He was 26 years old in February 1945. He had a younger sister named Margot and a mother who had not heard from him in 3 months because the postal routes had collapsed entirely. He had been flying combat missions since 1941. He had survived the Eastern Front, the defense of the Reich, and 2 mid-air collisions that should have killed him. Fellow pilots described him as ice-blooded. It was meant as the highest possible compliment. His account of what happened on February 13th was preserved in a file held within the Bundesarchiv, the German Federal Archives in Freiburg, in a collection of Luftwaffe operational records that was partially declassified in the 1990s. The document reference is RL 8/248. Researchers at the German Aviation Historical Society have verified its authenticity. Here is what he wrote. At approximately 0741 hours, climbing through 6,200 meters above the eastern Erzgebirge, Donar noticed an object at his 10 o'clock position. His first instinct, he wrote, was that it was debris from a bomber engagement further north. But it was not falling. It was not moving on any axis he could predict. He wrote, and I am translating directly from his German, the object was disc-shaped, approximately the diameter of 3 or 4 aircraft fuselages placed end to end. Its surface appeared to reflect the morning light without any visible exhaust, flame, or propulsion signature. It maintained a fixed altitude while I performed 2 observation passes. He performed 2 passes at a closing speed in the Me-262 of over 800 kilometers per hour. He wrote that on the second pass, he came within what he estimated was 400 meters of the object. Close enough to observe, he noted that there were no visible seams, no markings, no canopy, no landing gear configuration. He attempted to raise his wingman on the radio. There was no response. The radio had gone entirely silent. And then, in a sentence that his commanding officer later underlined in red pencil, the object accelerated away from my position at a speed I cannot estimate because no reference exists in my experience for what I observed. Donar landed. He filed the report. And then, by his own account in a post-war letter to his sister Margot, discovered that his mission logbook had been altered. The 41 minutes had been officially reclassified as a navigation delay due to weather. The weather that morning, according to verified Luftwaffe meteorological records from Parchim, was clear. Okay, I want to stop here for just a second because I am genuinely curious. What do you think Hans Donar saw? Drop it in the comments right now. Was it a secret Allied or German experimental aircraft? Was it a natural atmospheric phenomenon at that altitude? Or is this something we still do not have a clean explanation for? Seriously, tell me. 3 camps, no wrong answers. I will be reading every single comment. Now, let's see what the records actually say. It is 0741 hours. February 13th, 1945. The air at 6,200 meters is minus 40 degrees Celsius. At this altitude, the Me-262's Junkers Jumo turbines produce a sound Hans Donar has heard so many times it no longer registers as sound. It is just the air he breathes, the baseline of his world. He is flying east, roughly parallel to the ridge of the Erzgebirge. Below him, the mountains are white and still. No smoke, no movement. The sky is the clear gray-blue of a winter morning before full sunrise. He sees it at his 10 o'clock. His first thought is debris. It happens. Bomber formations sometimes scatter wreckage across 50 kilometers. But debris falls. Whatever this is, it is not falling. He banks left, adjusts his heading. The object does not move in response. It is circular. He can see that much from 2,000 meters. No wings, no tail, no contrail. The dawn light catches its upper surface and reflects back in a way that does not match aluminum, does not match steel, does not match any material he has cataloged in 4 years of aerial combat. He pushes the throttle forward. The Me-262 accelerates toward it. At 800 meters, his radio goes dead. Not static, not interference. Dead silence, the kind that makes the inside of a cockpit feel smaller than it is. At 600 meters, he can see its profile clearly now. Disc shape, smooth. No obvious cockpit. No seams he can identify. Its diameter, estimating against his own aircraft's wingspan of 12.6 meters, is somewhere between 40 and 50 meters across. It is simply there, hovering. At 6,200 meters. In clear air. In full daylight. He makes the first pass at 400 meters separation. It does not respond. It does not maneuver. It does not fire. It does not communicate. It simply holds its position while 270 kilograms of German fighter jet screams past it at over 800 kilometers per hour. He circles for the second pass. His hands, he wrote later, were completely steady on the controls. He was not afraid, he said. Or rather, fear was not the right word. The right word was recognition. The recognition that he was observing something that existed entirely outside of any category his mind contained. The second pass. 400 meters. He is close enough to see that the surface of the object appears to shimmer slightly at its edges. Not vibrate. Not glow. Shimmer. Like heat distortion above summer asphalt, except the temperature up here is -40 degrees. And then it leaves. There is no sound associated with it. No exhaust blast. No pressure wave that he can feel through the airframe. One moment it is there. The next moment it is simply no longer in the space it occupied. It does not fly away. It does not drop or climb. It ceases to be present. Donar flies a holding pattern for 11 minutes, documenting the exact coordinates, the exact time, the exact weather conditions. The professional habit of a man who has filed hundreds of combat reports. Then he turns southwest and begins the long descent back to Parchim. He does not speak about what happened until he is alone with his commanding officer, Major Karl-Heinz Brett-Schneider. Brett-Schneider reads the written account without expression, then reads it again, then places it in a separate folder, not the standard operational file. "We will look into this," he tells Donar. They never speak of it again. Here is what makes Hans Donar's account more than one pilot's strange morning. He was not the only one. The first corroborating account comes from a different unit entirely. In December 1944, 2 months before Donar's encounter, an American bomber crew from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron filed what became one of the earliest documented reports of what Allied airmen were calling Foo Fighters. On the night of November 23, 1944, Lieutenant Edward Schluter and his radar operator Lieutenant Donald Myers observed multiple orange and red spheres of light flying in formation alongside their Beaufighter over the Rhine Valley. The objects matched their speed, followed their turns, then simply stopped following. The term Foo Fighter came from the 415 Squadron's use of a then popular cartoon catchphrase. The name stuck. Within weeks, reports were coming in from both Allied and German aircrew with a consistency that Allied intelligence analysts found deeply troubling. A declassified OSS, Office of Strategic Services, document from January 1945, now held in the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, under record group RG-226, notes that over 30 separate sightings had been reported by Allied aircrew over Germany and occupied Western Europe in the final quarter of 1944. The document explicitly states that the objects did not appear to be enemy aircraft, flares, natural phenomena, or hallucinations induced by fatigue. It then, without offering an alternative explanation, concludes that the matter requires further investigation. The further investigation, if it happened, left no surviving record. Third account. From the German side. Also declassified. A 1944 internal Luftwaffe intelligence memorandum, referenced in David Clark and Andy Roberts' 2002 study, Out of the Shadows. UFOs, the establishment and the official cover-up, describes multiple reports from German fighter pilots of encountering Kugelblitz-type phenomena that tracked their aircraft without engaging them. The memo speculates, carefully and without conviction, that the objects may be an Allied secret weapon. The memo notes that no Allied secret weapon in any known category could account for the described behavior. Fourth account. Civilian. A letter preserved in the Bundesarchiv, written in January 1945 by a schoolteacher named Friedrich Obst in the town of Johanngeorgenstadt, directly in the Erzgebirge, describes seeing a large silent disc-shaped object cross the valley above his town at low altitude on a clear winter afternoon. He describes it as like a plate of hammered silver. He describes it moving with no sound of any engine known to me. He filed the letter with local civil defense authorities. It was never followed up. It survived because it was misfiled in an administrative folder and was not destroyed with the rest of the civil defense records at the end of the war. Fifth account. Regional folklore. Significantly older. The Erzgebirge, the Ur Mountains, have their own history of strange aerial sightings that predates the Second World War by centuries. Ethnographic studies of the region conducted by Leipzig University in the 1920s documented a recurring local legend of what miners and woodsmen called Himmelskeben, sky discs, described across multiple generations as silent, circular lights that appeared over the mountain ridges at high altitude, particularly in winter, and that local tradition associated with omens at the border between the known world and something else. The war did not create this. The war arrived in a place where this was already part of the landscape. So, what were they? There are 4 serious explanations. None of them fully close the case. The first explanation is psychological. By February 1945, Luftwaffe pilots were operating under conditions of extreme physiological stress. A 1946 post-war medical study of surviving German aviators, conducted by the U.S. Army Air Forces under Project Paperclip, documented widespread hypoxia-induced visual disturbances, hallucinations linked to oxygen system failures, and a documented pattern of misidentifying aircraft or atmospheric phenomena under stress. Sleep deprivation, operational exhaustion, and the psychological weight of fighting a war that was visibly being lost could, this theory argues, produce consistent hallucinations across multiple crews. What this theory cannot explain is why pilots from different nations, with different training, different languages, and no communication with each other, described objects with the same shape, the same behavior, and the same response to being approached. The Allied pilots were not exhausted in the same way as the Luftwaffe. Several of their sightings occurred on standard courier flights with well-rested crews. The second explanation is experimental technology. Both the Germans and the Allies were in the final years of the most intensive weapons development program in human history. The Germans had produced the world's first operational jet aircraft, the world's first ballistic missiles, the first rocket-powered fighter, and were known to be researching numerous other experimental programs. Project Silbervogel, a suborbital bomber concept, was under development. The Horten Ho 229, a flying wing jet aircraft with radar-absorbent properties, had reached prototype stage. Could a classified German or Allied circular wing experimental aircraft account for the sightings? Possibly for some of them. But no declassified document from any national archive has ever produced a circular aircraft program from this period capable of the described performance. An aircraft that can accelerate from a hover to beyond visual range in what a jet pilot describes as instantaneous does not match any known 1945 propulsion system. The third explanation is natural atmospheric phenomena. Ball lightning, a poorly understood but documented atmospheric phenomenon, produces globe-shaped light sources that can track aircraft, appear to hover, and vanish without warning. St. Elmo's fire has been documented at high altitude producing persistent light effects around aircraft. Certain atmospheric lensing conditions over mountain ranges can create optical illusions of disc-shaped reflective objects at altitude. This explanation accounts for some of the luminous sphere sightings. It accounts far less well for Donar's account, in which the object was observed in clear daylight at close range twice by a pilot specifically trained in aerial observation, who estimated its physical diameter and noted the absence of exhaust signature, markings, and propulsion. The fourth explanation is the oldest one, the Himmelskeben, the sky discs, the thing that the miners and woodsmen of the Erzgebirge had been documenting for centuries before a single aircraft ever flew over that mountain range. This explanation does not offer a mechanism. It does not offer a species or a technology or a nation of origin. It offers something harder to dismiss: continuity. Whatever Hans Donar saw on February 13, 1945, people had been seeing it in that same sky, over that same mountain range for generations before the war arrived. None of these four explanations fully accounts for what multiple trained military aviators, on both sides of the conflict, with no prior communication and no shared incentive to fabricate, consistently reported in the skies over Germany in the final months of the Second World War. Stay with me, because the final account, the one that was sealed inside a Luftwaffe administrative file for over 50 years, the one that a retired archivist in Freiburg almost discarded as a filing error in 1997, is unlike anything we have covered so far. If this story has you thinking, hit that like button right now. It genuinely matters. Here is what the document says. In 1997, a researcher named Dr. Gerhard Schubert, working at the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg on a project documenting late-war Luftwaffe operational records, found a folder misfiled under a routine administrative classification. Inside the folder was a handwritten report, 11 pages, dated March 2, 1945, filed by Major Karl-Heinz Brett-Schneider, Hans Donar's commanding officer. Brett-Schneider's report was not a single sighting account. It was a summary. Over the preceding 3 months, he had been quietly collecting testimony from pilots within his wing who had reported encounters similar to Donar's. He had done this unofficially without authorization because, as he wrote in the report's introduction, the frequency and consistency of these accounts could not, in my professional judgment, be explained by any of the standard categories available to me. He had collected 7 separate accounts. 7 pilots. Different dates, ranging from November 1944 through February 1945. All of them reported disc-shaped or spherical objects. All of them reported the same radio silence on approach. All of them reported that the objects made no aggressive action. All of them reported the same quality of departure, the same sense that the object did not fly away so much as simply cease to occupy its position. But the detail that Brett-Schneider himself flagged, the detail he underlined twice in his own handwriting, was this. On January 17, 1945, a pilot identified in the report only by his service number, 3-417, reported an encounter above the Erzgebirge at 7,000 meters. His account was consistent with all the others in every detail but one. He reported that the object came to within approximately 200 meters of his aircraft. At that distance, he wrote, he could see what appeared to be a surface marking on the underside of the disc. Not a national insignia. Not a manufacturer's plate. Not any symbol used by any military force in the conflict. He described it in writing as a circular arrangement of smaller circles, evenly spaced, like the face of a flower. Brett-Schneider's report ends on page 11 with a sentence that stops mid-paragraph. Whether the remaining pages were never written or were removed at some point before the folder was misfiled, is unknown. The last complete sentence Major Brett-Schneider wrote reads, I do not know what these men encountered. I know only that they are not men who invent stories, and that whatever they saw above the Erzgebirge, it was not. The sentence does not finish. There is something specific that happens to human perception under extended combat conditions. Soldiers and pilots who survive long operational tours develop what psychologists call hypervigilance, a state of heightened sensory awareness that does not switch off, that begins to register threat in every shadow, every silence, every movement at the edge of vision. One interpretation of the Foo Fighter accounts is that this hypervigilance was misfiring, creating pattern and meaning where there was only atmosphere and exhaustion. But here is the thing about Hans Donar, about the pilots in Brett-Schneider's file, about the American airmen of the 415th. Hypervigilance makes you more likely to misidentify a known threat as more dangerous than it is. It does not fabricate objects with 50-meter diameters at 400-meter range. It does not synchronize descriptions across strangers who will never meet. It does not leave a paper trail in 3 separate national archives. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Not a rhetorical one, a real one. If these pilots, on both sides of the most destructive war in human history, encountered something they could not explain, Something that left no physical evidence and no complete documentation. Something that behaved as if it had no interest in the war below it at all. What does it mean that it was already there? In that same sky, over those same mountains, long before the armies arrived, long before the aircraft were built, long before any of us had a name for what a thing like that might be. Major Brett-Schneider filed his report on March 2, 1945. 6 weeks later, the war in Europe was over. He survived. He never published the report. He never mentioned it to journalists or historians. He died in Hamburg in 1978. The folder sat in Freiburg for 50 years, misfiled, undisturbed, until an archivist almost threw it away. Somewhere above the Ore Mountains, on a winter morning in 1945, something looked down at a war it had no part in, and said nothing, and left no name. Now I want to hear from you. Which of those 4 theories do you believe? Psychological? Experimental tech? Natural phenomenon? Or something older than all of that? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely read every single one. Let's talk about this. We set a goal of 10 likes at the start of this video. If we crossed it, that is your support driving this channel forward. If we have not crossed it yet, this is your moment. 1 click. Next time we leave Europe entirely. A different war. A different continent. And an incident that 3 governments spent 60 years pretending never happened. Until the documents finally came out. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you in the dark.